Welcome back, everyone, to Roompact's ResEdChat podcast. Every episode, our team of hosts brings you timely discussions on a variety of topics of interest to hired professionals who work in and with university housing, residence life, residential education, et cetera, et cetera. So, in this episode, certainly is one where kind of worlds are colliding. You know, residential curriculums evolving or sort of going into divisional curriculums. I think that is something that has been happening. You know, sometimes they might start one way or the other, but we're really digging in deep here with talking about going from a residential curriculum to a divisional curriculum. So our guest today, Erin Simpson, if you want to briefly introduce yourself and give an overview of your professional background, and I guess if you want to kind of tie in sort of relations to the curricular approach, I guess, as it's relevant, then we'll kind of go from there, sort of digging into this topic at hand.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, y'all. My name is Erin Simpson. I serve as an assistant vice president for student affairs and assistant dean of students at the University of Oklahoma, but I grew up in housing. I'm a housing kid through and through. I spent about 15 years professionally in residence life, and the University of Oklahoma has a divisional curriculum, but it started about 9, 10 years ago in our residence life unit. I have also worked in diversity and equity units. Now I work in the vice president's office, and so I've kind of had the opportunity to bounce around our division a little bit, and just really found the value in what we started in residence life and how it's translated beyond into the curricular approach for our entire division. I've served as an ICA faculty member at the Institute for Curricular Approach. I've co-chaired the Institute a couple of times. I'm all in on the idea of curriculum and what it can do for us in higher education.
Yeah, we love the ICA here a lot. We've always done kind of episodes sort of like on it generally and, sort of anticipating it each year. So obviously that is a great resource, just, in general for this work. And we've done a lot of episodes just kind of hitting on so many different aspects of developing a new curricular approach from scratch, or kind of evaluating it, assessing it, and everything. So it's really been great to, I think, kind of cover all the corners here, and this being one in particular where it may be like you got something good going with a residential curriculum, and how you can kind of expand that work and everything. So if you can give a brief explanation of the divisional curriculum at OU, kind of as it stands now, and then kind of how it came to be.
Sure. So our divisional curriculum was created literally by our entire division, which is such a was such an interesting professional experience to watch all 23 of our departments come together and really like I want to say battle it out, but like kindly, like the student affairs way, where you say things like, I just feel like about what should be the three main buckets, the three big learning aims for our school. So we settled on three that feel really relevant to us. We've spent the last couple of years in divisional working groups. Every year we have a new working group come together and advance that good work that our entire division did initially. We do all kinds of professional development days around curriculum. We do all of these things. All of that is only possible because Residence Life had the cheat code. Residence Life already knew. They had already done this work. That's our largest division on our campus, like it is in many places. They have the most natural touch points with our students, right? We're a 1-year residential requirement, big public institution. So that means Residence Life is the front door to the student experience. It is a major culture driver for us here at the University of Oklahoma. And so Residence Life already had sort of this muscle memory around what curriculum building looks like it is. And they played really well. So they came to the table and said, well, this is what we've been doing for the past 8 years. How can this feed up? What can this look like? We didn't copy and paste. So the residential curriculum that the university had enjoyed and been really successful at sort of sunset a little bit, but the bones are still there, right? The idea of what curriculum is definitely still there. But the learning aims morphed to be more inclusive of across our entire division. Also, time happens, right? So the original learning goals that Residence Life had created were incredibly situated in a time that was, pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, some other pieces like that happened in the context of higher education, and it was time to revise those anyway. So Residence Life came to the table with all of the knowledge, with the muscle memory around how to make it work, with the bones of like we know we need rubrics, or we can show you what our facilitation guides look like, and a buy-in, right? They brought a significant amount of buy-in to the process because they were like, well, this is what we've been doing, and we actually don't know how y'all have been doing your work without it, right? At some point, it becomes such a natural component to the Res Life work that they felt really passionate about the rest of us, the rest of the division, having the opportunity to get to work within that structure as well.
Yeah, and I think the way that you framed that is kind of a perfect segue to my next question, because I think uh, I would assume more often than not, and I guess especially if you kind of look backward more, that a divisional curriculum likely started as a residential curriculum. I think nowadays, and certainly as we're looking ahead, I can imagine that like an institution that has nothing may be it, maybe 50-50 or so, kind of like starting at the divisional approach and certainly leaning a lot on, like you're saying, to sort of the folks in residence education where, they have a lot of touch points and inputs and, what are these students looking for, how do they want to get it? And like, anything to sort of inform the process. But, um, like you said, I mean, regardless, whether you're starting from nothing or kind of building upon a residential curriculum, those are going to be colleagues that you're, leaning on a lot. So, to dig into kind of sort of the case study at OU, like, in what ways, if you want to sort of expand on like having a residential curriculum first, make it easier to implement a divisional curriculum? Because I think like, we've done episodes where it's even just sort of acknowledging sometimes like the change management piece, all that emotional stuff, the sort of battling out, like you're saying, like that part of it, even as much as like kind of logically people understanding concepts and going through like policies, procedures, and whatever else. Like, so I feel like those are like two sides of the coin. So whatever kind of way you want to approach this, like, you had something you're building upon, like, how did that help, uh, with the divisional curriculum work?
Well, we had anticipated beginning a divisional curriculum. So we sent our entire student affairs executive leadership team to ICA in fall 2019. And spring 2020, we were going to launch this. We were going to go, we were going to build this divisional curriculum. Well, spring 2020 did what it did. We descended into pandemic time, and that didn't happen. But there were some departments that had been represented on that trip to ICA where we took this massive group to be like, this is what we're going to do. But said, well, hey, we don't want to wait. Residence Life has been so successful, right? We're watching their student staff understand the point, right? We're watching their coordinators, assistant, associate directors feel really empowered in their work, feel really solid in what they want to put out into Residence Life and what they want students to get back from it. So we're watching all of this success. So we don't actually want to wait, because the division has very clearly and reasonably and necessarily put a pause on creating something new for us in these uncertain and troubling times. And so Residence Life actually got to be the blueprint for some other departments first. So our student life department, our gender and equality center, one of our scholarship programs decided that they were going to launch departmental curriculums, and they were going to teach their staff about it, and they were going to learn from Residence Life, and they were going to do all of these things prior to the division. Because at that point, we had no idea, right, when we would be able to divisionally come back together around creative or innovative ideas that weren't rooted in sort of like the fear and uncertainty of the times, right? And so these departments, like, very clearly were ready, and so sort of launched something, and then participated with Residence Life as much as possible. And also, I want to make sure that I acknowledge that Residence Life units across the country were carrying their institutions during COVID, and so they showed up in support of, right? They wanted to participate with. They were like, hey, we know that you are doing some massive things over here that weren't perhaps on your bingo card for what this experience would look like. And so how can we supplement? How can we feed in? How can we do these things? So then what that looks like is all of a sudden you have like one really seasoned department who believes in this quite a bit. And then you've got three sort of baby departments who are just really eager, just really excited, and they're putting stuff together, and they're feeling it out, but none of that's really talking to each other. short of those 4 departments maybe showing up at the same program or being like, "Oh, well, here's a convergence point in some of our learning aims." So that's when it became clearer to us as a division that, yes, we had a lot going on. Like everybody, all of 2020 and 2021 had a lot going on. But our departments were actually hungry for this type of structure, this kind of work, this kind of thinking, and this kind of collaboration. And so then that's when we put together the idea of, okay, we're going to spend the fall of 22 building. And so that's what we did. We spent an entire fall semester coming together, building all of these pieces. I think it was actually the fall of 21. Time is really hard and relative, and essentially at this point, a circle. So um, we we came together and all these units got to participate, but I've got residence life as like the elder statesman in the room, right? Being like, well, these are the things, right? And they carry a lot of cachet and weight on our campus. And then I've got departments like our student life unit, who is essentially like our engagement hub, a campus activities unit, uh, being like, this is what it's doing for us. We're a baby. We've been doing this for like a year, 9 months, and this is how it's showing up for us. And then I've got former housing folks running other units being like, please, 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 right? We really want this. And so it really allowed our entire division, even, every time change happens, you've had episodes on change management, you've done all these things, there are always skeptics in the room. There are always people who are interested in comfort and safety for very good reasons, particularly at that time in our sort of place, right? They're like, we're actually doing really good, and we're just now coming out of something really scary, or beginning to emerge, right? And you want us to change everything again. But I got to be honest, it felt like the window for change was open, right? Because we had just changed everything we had done during COVID, right? And we'd figured out how to do things on Zoom that we would have never even considered. We had figured out, first of all, how to run Zoom, right? We had figured out all of these things, but that change window was just starting to kind of close. At some point, people were going to be done, and they were going to be like, I need predictability, stability. I need to function in things that I already feel really good and competent at. Um, but I think we just got in, right? We just got in that change window, and all of a sudden people were like, okay, so you mean if I can just link the things that I know my department, like I need to think about things in this learning way and not just recreate what we did before the pandemic, because it turns out people aren't actually showing up to those things right now. And I was like, yeah. And that was it, right? That was it. All of a sudden, we spent a lot of time talking about how this generation of students needs to see a ton of relevance. They need to see why this matters. They need to see why it matters for them. They have all kinds of things that are competing for their time, attention, energy, and resources, and we've got to make it worth it. They think about that. Is this worth it? Versus, I feel like at once upon a time, students just came to things because that was like what they did, right? They were like, oh, this is happening, so we go to that. That's not that's not happening. Students aren't just showing up because it exists. It's got to be relevant. It's got to be worth it. It's got to speak to some sense of like something that they need, want, feel safe, affirmed by. And so this has helped. This has created that space for us. And and when I think about the timeline of how we did it, it it like kind of overwhelms me because I'm like sort of flooded with like the emotional response of that time. But I think that change window was just so important. And I tried really hard to like keep it cracked open a little bit, right? Like, let's be comfortable with change. Let's be comfortable with, and that I think has also been really helpful. Like, remember the last time we did this, it went really well. We all really liked it, and so we've been trying to really cash in on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to frame it because I was thinking kind of an interesting question on that is like that idea of acknowledging part of sort of the change management equation is like kind of just, where you are in time and space. Like, is there a change window that is opening or that you can open? Because I could even think about like if like, there's sort of leadership transitions or changes, like that's always time when I think you can get that sort of like support for things from that level. Certainly, if there's a moment where, like, which is I would hope is few and far between, but like things come to an absolute halt, you can kind of really evaluate, rebuild, and kind of restart or something. But uh, The other thing to me, I guess, is, uh, a lot of institutions out there have had residential curriculums maybe for several years and everything. Um, and I know this is not an exact case at OU, but I guess just confirm my suspicions. Like, do you feel like it could be a good opportunity or way to sort of frame this and start to open that window of opportunity of like, say like, okay, well, we, created this or implemented this curriculum, however many years ago, we're looking to sort of evaluate it, and do that evaluation in service of likely expanding that to a divisional level. Like, do you feel like something like that would make sense? You think for a lot of kind of your colleagues at other institutions to where, because I think again, like to sort of piggyback on the way that you're framing this, which I think is really smart. That idea of like, sometimes like the window just gets open, it gets thrust open by something, and you're like, well, okay, well, um, other times it's like, yeah, you need to kind of start gently opening it and kind of getting folks ready to sort of like do this work and make these, kind of transitions and everything. So that idea of like, the long tenure, kind of an expiration date on a residential curriculum, evaluating, assessing, updating could be, a good sort of framework to expand it to a divisional level.
I absolutely think yes. I also think it helps. There's two sides to that coin. One, coming forward and being like, "Hey, it's time to revise, advance, take a look at, evaluate, assess, do all these like really good things that are actually an essential element of curriculum building." Um, it also gives your so that gives your division sort of the opportunity to say, "Oh, it's my time to jump on the train," right? But it also gives your residence life staff the opportunity to say, this has served us really well, and it's okay if we sunset pieces of it so that we can move forward like sort of in tandem with our colleagues across the division. Because there were pieces, I worked in I was an architect, right, of the residential curriculum at the University of Oklahoma, one of many. And so there were even pieces for me at that point when I was, leading a divisional change where I was like, oh, I don't want to say, oh, hang on, right? We worked really hard on that, like one phrase in this one narrative. Where's it going to go, right? And so, but I had the opportunity because that window was open and because residence life was coming forward and saying it's also time for us to revise. It felt natural for them to get the opportunity to sort of let go peacefully to some of their pieces of their curriculum that maybe will show up. Nothing is like in the trash can, so it's not that it's gone forever. It maybe didn't fit in the first iteration of the divisional curriculum, and I think that was a really important piece for us as well, right? That we didn't just come in and Bigfoot stomp all over their stuff, right? It was an invitation to collaborate and an invitation to figure out how some of their programmatic level strategy level learning outcomes really did still fit, absolutely still fit in our larger divisional curriculum, right? Like when we think about what our residence life curriculum, our residential curriculum looked like, it it's directed clearly in our divisional curriculum. It has to be, right? It's contextually specific. It's really, it feels like the University of Oklahoma, like brand and style. And so, of course, there's some pieces that feel very familiar, but they don't feel identical. And I think that was a really good piece of that as well for both sides of that equation to feel like they were had the opportunity to get to participate in advancing rather than one side feeling taken and one side feeling like you have to conform to what they're doing. I think that was a really significant sort of development in the collaborative change management. Let's friends, let's all be besties part of the curriculum building.
Yeah, I think that's part of I guess all of this that is always just so kind of fascinating to me because I think well, I mean with so many things in higher ed, there's the very much adherence to the collegiality, and all that. But even still, there can be these sort of artificial kind of, siloing or kind of barriers in the sense of like, I think people do earnestly want to work together and be collegial and understand they're all on the same team. But, any number of things sort of get in the way because certainly it's that idea of like, well, I have my goals, I have the things that I'm trying to achieve, like, and, there's only so many hours in the day kind of thing or whatever. But like, I think, um, when you can get folks together for something like this, it's just a great kind of rallying cry to make sure everyone knows sort of like that we're all striving towards the same goals, but doing it in our own ways and um, anything like that. And I guess, yeah, just figuring out the right sort of approach to that, timing for that, and um, even like, part of kind of what you're getting at before of like, it's not even saying that like, well, the way that you're doing things is wrong. You need to do it this way. And it's because I said so. Like sometimes it is just being like, no, just like reframe and maybe like, contextualize what you're doing in a different way. You're already doing a lot of great, amazing work that, achieves what we're hoping for students. But we just want to make sure that we can kind of ground that and, you know, for lack of a better term, even just kind of like justify or defend, what we're doing by, having it uh, just, kind of fall in line with this framework that we're establishing that like everybody's sort of signing off on and agreeing to. And um, so I'm curious then, specifically for what you're doing, and it could be, I guess, like, things specific to OU or just sort of what you're seeing kind of in the larger world impacting your work. Like, what is on the horizon for your work in this area?
So I think anybody who is thinking about higher education right now cannot, in any format, really cannot be ignoring legal and legislative frameworks that may be impacting the work that we've, really been trying to advance. I'm spending a ton of time thinking about and working with other schools on what is the core value and how does it get talked about and how do you navigate and manage um, impending legislation either at the state or national level that impacts what you want to do. Like how do you navigate that? Is it a preservation strategy? Do you preserve the service, right? And or is it a vocabulary strategy? You just use different words, right? It really did. There's no single answer because we're all in like these very specific tiny boats that are sort of floating around in the same like sea of uncertainty around what's happening, right? I think you can't ignore a dear colleague letter. I don't think you simply can't ignore legislative action in your own states. You simply can't do that. And so I think it's important that institutions, um, it has always been, but it is so important that institutions are understanding like what their strategies are. Um, and student affairs has to be involved at the table for that. Like simply has to be. You were talking about like earlier, like sort of our adherence to collegiality, and that's what happens, right? When you are as a field have been sort of structurally and systematically under resourced and put in this like sort of scarcity mindset. And so everybody is starting to feel really like, well, I have to hang on to my piece so that I'm relevant. And we're actually watching colleagues at institutions across the country lose their jobs for doing really good and important work. And so if this isn't on your mind as you're structuring a curriculum that can stand up to scrutiny, then it has to be. Like it simply has to be. I wish that that wasn't what we were thinking about. All right, that's not my favorite thing, but it absolutely is for the specific timing and context that we're in right now. This is a movement in higher education that we can't ignore and have to deal with, and it doesn't matter what kind of state you think you live in. It has to be. You have to be thinking about that. That's just to me the to not do that is honestly negligent. Like you have to be thinking about it in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and I mean, us recording this on the last day of March 31st, 2025, like I think that's the idea that like who knows like what exactly will happen in the, coming months and everything. But I think the ambiguity, the unpredictability, the sort of, just sort of like turbulence and choppy waters are not going to stop even if like things like legislatively or policy wise like slow down. Like that doesn't, alleviate like demographic cliffs or like there's other sort of things that have been happening. And it's like, this isn't helping. This is just like one more thing that like, but so like I think it is even just like generally that idea of like this work is valuable as sort of a grounding, no matter what sort of turbulence we're going through. But I think especially now it could be, trying to build out that moat a little bit that'll sort of like, defend the castle of like, curricular approaches, and knowing that like, we're doing what we're doing with thoughtfulness and intentionality. We can show our work, we can, do all this stuff. Or is it just being like kind of a house of cards that could just sort of blow over whenever sort of a, rough storm sort of like comes into town and stuff. So like, and I'm always sort of like the, you know, the optimist, and the idea that like work like this allows for that sort of like durability and everything. But certainly it's like you're saying, like it just the awareness, the acknowledgement, the sort of interfacing with what's happening is like important. You can't just sort of, with me sort of have this like almost like toxic positivity of just like, I'm sure everything will work out, I don't know, we'll just keep it, whatever. It's like, do what you can, do what you have to, like to be able to sort of, defend your work, justify it, and those sort of things. But then like, pivot where you need to just sort of like, I think certain things that could be like, I like that idea. Sometimes we're just like, it's just like the vocabulary. It's like, if you just want me to call it something different, I'll do that. But like, we'll keep doing the important work that we're doing, whatever. Like, that'd be an area where I'm like, happy to make that compromise for you so that like you're happy. But just the idea of these like sort of rug pulls and everything are just, yeah, I mean, it's not, helping in any material sense. But I hope that folks, are sort of like insulated a bit if they are doing this sort of curricular work and everything, to where like it is so integral to like the student experience, and you want to retain students, you want them to be happy so that this institution exists and whatever. Like, so yeah, we shall see what the future holds. But as folks are navigating this moment, I guess whether it's stuff to just grit and bear it and get through it, or to sort of like help elevate and continue to enhance, their work and sort of the curricular approach, like any resources, advice that you may want to share for folks as they maybe are, kind of pursuing certainly like similar journeys, if they're specifically kind of going through like the, changing from residential to divisional curricular approaches or anything like that.
I'm always obviously, I mean, I started the podcast plugging ICA. That's, the gold standard of resources. And honestly, the one of the better professional communities I've ever gotten to be a part of, right? People there are generous and transparent in failure, which is just not anyone's favorite place to live, but is a thing that happens at ICA, and I really appreciate it. I also, in addition to that community, if you don't have a local like student affairs community with like your rival up the highway or whatever, like this is the time in our context where folks in um, across states and across sort of regions really need to be spending time creating more community. I am fascinated by what I learned from my friends at Oklahoma State. Right? They are we exchange ideas. We do not like each other on the football field, but we love each other in like a student affairs context, and I think that's really important. If there are spaces that you have opportunities to interact with folks who are in similar or um, even the same in your own state, sort of like contexts, I think it's great. I think it's a really important time for that. We probably should have been doing that forever, and I don't love that, sort of like confusion about legislation is what's bringing us closer together, but interest convergence works. So there's that. I am reading a book, or I can constantly rereading Critical Hope. If that's not a book that you've read, I would suggest putting it on your bookshelf. Hope is not a strategy is one of our favorite things to say in curricular work, but the book Critical Hope is, I think, an incredibly important resource for us in this work right now. And then I'm just, I'm trying to feed myself with positive spaces like this one, right? Like this is a podcast I listen to regularly to think about. I don't even work in residence life anymore, but that doesn't mean I can't learn from this space. And so there are all kinds of things like that that I'm trying to do to counterbalance, everything else that's like sort of always pummeling us. Um, yeah, so I think that, friends, the answer to most terrible things is to build more community. So if that's something that you're like, wow, I'm not sure that's happening at my institution as well as it could be, now's the time. If you're listening to this, you're the person to do it. Just start inviting people to lunch. I don't know. Community is the antidote to so many things. Um, and I just I think we are in a time that we need it more than ever.
Absolutely. And I think it is always good to get those little nudges. And, I think I'd imagine, yeah, if you're the person listening who is now kind of compelled to reach out to your colleagues and get that, cup of coffee, lunch, whatever it might be, like, 'cause I think we get in our heads about that of like, different notions of people like, oh, everybody's busy or whatever else. But it's like, no, we do need that like now more than ever. And I think just getting into that habit so that like you have it, to get through the times now and to build your sort of endurance and everything for even further in the future when hopefully you won't really need it as much. But um I think, yeah, it is such an interesting moment, and I think that idea that like hope is important, but also like not like a strategy. So it's like, how do you balance that of like, well, I need to build that sort of energy, and maybe do that of like find my communities, find different spaces and places and podcasts, and you certainly appreciate you listening, and because that's certainly good for me is like the idea that there are thoughtful people committed to trying to have the right conversations at the right time and drive sort of work forward that is having a positive impact on others and all that. So that's always just a big part of my routine as well. And certainly working remotely, finding spaces and places for community and stuff is uh, I've found to be that much more important because there was a time where it's just like, oh, this is so great, like whatever. Then I'm just like, no, I'm like itching to like get out of the house and also just be in community with like higher ed folks and everything. So I think it could even be where you find it in like you know uh, unpredictable places kind of thing of like, oh, this is like not exactly like, the idea of like not working in residence life, but you still listen to the show because like, yeah, we talk about a lot of different stuff. So, or like going out to, a particular conference or whatever, where it's just like, oh, I work a lot with those people, or I used to work in this space, or, whatever else. Like, I think just talking shop and being in community with people who work professionally in higher ed is always time well spent. So, um, well, I appreciate your work, the time that you've given here, and all that you've shared. So, ways to connect with you in the show notes. But yeah, this was a great conversation. I think again, just really trying to continue to drive forward, exploring all facets of developing, maintaining, enhancing curricular approaches at institutions all over the country. So, yeah, just thanks again.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Super, super appreciated it.